What's up, everybody? Welcome into another exciting episode of That Dynasty Show. Today, I think this is our 10th video that we're doing, and we're finally going to talk about the 2022 rookie class. But before we get into that, got to introduce my good buddy Tyler. So, Tyler, how you doing tonight, man?
Doing great, man. Yeah, I know it's a little late for a 2022 rookie video, but we would be remiss if we didn't get to claim our stakes in these guys and at least talk about them a little bit.
Yeah, and you know what? There's a lot of guys out there that don't do their rookie drafts until July or August. I know most crazy dynasty players like ourselves, we were doing ours the Monday after the NFL draft. So there's about not even a 48-hour cooling period before we were taking our rookies. But I know my dad, he's been in a dynasty league since I think that's the early 1990s. I think the first name on that trophy was like 91 or 92. But I was just talking to him the other day. He doesn't do his rookie draft until the first weekend of August. So for guys like that, hopefully we can help you out and give you some insights in our rookie mock draft here today. It's kind of a combination between a rookie mock draft and a rookie ranking kind of thing. What we're going to do is we're going to basically name our top 24 guys in a mock draft style. So I'll let Tyler make the first pick here in a few moments, and then I'll take the second pick. The reason why I'm giving Tyler the first pick is because it's his man crush, and I know he's not going to pass him up. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And let's see, what one is this? There we go. So Tyler, here's the screen. I have our draft board here on the left, all available players there on the right. Let me zoom in a little bit, see if that helps. There we go. All right. If you can see my screen, can you see my screen, Tyler?
Yeah, perfectly well. All
Just
good.
want to make sure you have the draft board, but go ahead. You are officially on the clock with pick number one. And before you even say it, I'm just going to drag and drop him on over there.
Yeah, I was gonna say you didn't really have to wait to leave that one there, but I'm not gonna go off too much. But Breece Hall, the obvious number one for everyone, production animal at Iowa State, had like over 3,000 all-purpose yards, like almost 3,500 all-purpose yards in the last 2 years. I know a lot of people are worried about the landing spot. I'm not. The guy is just a touchdown monster. He's got a nose for the goal line, and it's going to stay that way. The guy scored 24, had 24 straight games with a touchdown at Iowa State, which didn't really have a prolific offense without him. He's the man, and he will be the man, and he'll remain in the top 2 rounds of dynasty startups for the next 3 years.
Yeah, and I don't think that's an unreasonable call out. There's plenty of videos where I'm arguing with you on Breece Hall. I'm not going to do that here today, and I'm just going to go ahead, let you have your moment, and I'm going to move on to my pick two. And my pick two is different than a lot of people's pick twos. I'm taking Jameson Williams, number 2 overall. He's my favorite wide receiver in this draft class. It's definitely a close one, right? Because, I do like Drake London. I do like Wilson. I even like Treylon Burks. But Jameson Williams, to me, he's just this massive play that's waiting to happen. I think he has the highest upside of any single person in this entire draft. Yes, that's even including Breece Hall. I think Jameson Williams just has an absolute massive ceiling. Obviously, this is dynasty, right? If we're talking about redraft, Jameson Williams is not going to be the first wide receiver that I draft this year because he's coming off of the ACL. We don't even know when he's going to start playing for Detroit this season. But in dynasty, you can afford to park him on your taxi squad for this year and then activate him as soon as next year. Or if you don't have a taxi squad, join a league that has one because taxi squads are the shit. But I think his ceiling is sky high. He's fast as all hell. He's going to score 1 trillion touchdowns. As long as Detroit keeps building how they're building, they have a big tight end in Hawkinson. They have their run game solidified in DeAndre Swift. I do, even though I have said Amon-Ra is not my favorite receiver on this channel, I do like Amon-Ra as a supporting receiver, and DJ Chark isn't anything to sneeze at either on the other side of Jameson Williams. So I think once he does get on the field, he's going to show out. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him score the most points out of all rookies as wide receiver in a points per game fashion. I think once he's on the field, he's going to be there. His presence is going to be felt, and he's going to be awesome. So I'm taking JMO at 102.
So I like Jameson Williams. I'm not sure if I like him at the 102. When you take Jameson Williams at the 102, you're making a big bet because the likelihood of him being the most valuable receiver in this class in terms of ADP or just in terms of the trade market during the season, he's going to be the lowest of any receiver because he's coming off the injury. He's not going to be putting up the production that the other guys are. It might take him a little bit more time. But I think that when you watch him play, he reminds me a little. He's got a little CD Lamb in him. He's got some swag and a lot of big play ability. The guy, like you said, really high ceiling, fast as all hell. Really a polished receiver and capable of big plays anytime he touches the ball. Outruns every DB on the field. A really good route runner, and I think like you said, he's probably got the highest ceiling of any of the receivers in this class. Not sure I like his build so much because I think he could end up being injury prone, but the guy is super talented. So while he's not the safest pick at 102, I don't mind going for upside and making that bet. And if you are correct on this, it's going to look really good because you're the only mock that's going to put Jameson Williams at the 102.
Yeah, and it's been unpopular all off season ever since the draft. But Jameson Williams, he was my pre-draft wide receiver one. I would say the last month before the NFL draft happened. So I've had Jameson Williams wide receiver one season for this class since like late March, and I will happily still parade that around. I have a feeling I know who you're going here at 1-3, and I'm excited to talk about him with you as well, because I do have a reason for taking Jameson Williams over the other guys, and I will highlight those as we go through it just because of, like I said, Jameson Williams, the ceiling pick, in my opinion, and that's what I want to go with in a class where, Williams, London, Wilson, and Burks, all four of those guys are in the tier one of this class for wide receivers. So I'm going to take the one that has the most upside. But I'll let you go ahead and make your pick here at 103.
Yeah, so going pretty much as the board is going. I don't know if you made this as you predicted it would happen, but Drake London from the 103. Yeah, he's going to Atlanta. I know that wide receiving room is going to be kind of dominated by Kyle Pitts, and they don't have an answer at quarterback right now. But watching the guy play, he reminds me a lot of Mike Evans, and he checks a lot of the boxes that you want to see with your receivers. He was competing with NFL talent at USC with Michael Pittman and Amon-Ra St. Brown, who were both top 24 receivers last year, and showed that they were really talented. And Drake London was playing with them when he was only 18 years old, right? So Drake London feels like a really safe pick. He reminds me a lot of like Mike Evans. He's really good with the contested catch, and he's a guy who you can also give the ball to like on short routes, and he can also do something with it. He doesn't have like electrifying speed or anything like that, but he's a big body, and he just bullies people. I talked about it during the 2023 mock. He's a guy who looks like an 8th grader playing with 6th graders. Looks like his body is too big for a lot of people, and I feel like it's going to fare well for him in the NFL. And there's not a lot of competition there. I know everyone loves Kyle Pitts, and Kyle Pitts is more of a receiver than a tight end, really. I think we should probably start a petition to name Kyle Pitts as a receiver in fantasy leagues, because it doesn't really seem fair to me. But yeah, Drake London is most people's 102, so I'm happy with, if I'm at the 103 getting Drake London, I'm really happy about it.
Yeah, anything 103 or later for Drake London, according to the ADP, is going to be a screaming value. So definitely can't complain about that. The reason why I went with JMO over Drake London, again, it's a ceiling play. With that being said, I think Drake London does have the second highest ceiling, and I think it is not too far off from what I think Jameson Williams' ceilings is. Like you said, Drake London reminds me also a lot of Mike Evans, and that's his ceiling. If you can get a big-bodied receiver like that, that's going to go out there and get you 1,000 yards every year for 7 years in a row. I mean, hey, you're going to be pretty fucking pumped at that. Even at the 102, 103, hell, you could take him 101 if you think he's going to turn into something like that. My issue with Drake London, though, is that Mike Evans is just one of many different possibilities. And you can make that argument with any single player that's a rookie, is that they have so many different possibilities. But in today's NFL, those big-bodied wide receivers, they have a much smaller hit rate than the guys like your Jameson Williams and the guys like your Garrett Wilson. There's still definitely a place for them, but those early round guys of that stature are more prone to bust. I don't know the exact science behind it. I don't know if it's just how the NFL works these days. I don't know if that style of play has just been adapted to, but I just don't love when a prospect's top bit of talent is their contested catch. That's what worries me about Drake London, is that's where his bread and butter was in college. But DBs are significantly better in the NFL than in college. I don't think they're going to allow themselves to be as bullied as Drake London was able to do in college. But with that being said, I'm not hating on the pick at all. Mike Evans is very much in the range of his possibility. The only other downside with him is that he's going to be connected to Kyle Pitts for at least the next 4 years. Kyle Pitts is going to be a franchise player in Atlanta. Drake London, that's yet to be seen, but it's very possible that these two are connected for a very long time, which is going to limit both of their touchdown upside because they're both massive, beastly men that are just going to compete with each other for red zone targets. So we'll see how that plays out. But at the end of the day, there's a really good chance that Drake London leads all rookie receivers in yardage and touchdowns this year. So 103, that's a really good pick.
Yeah, I didn't want you to take Jameson Williams because I didn't really want to take Drake London because I'd like some other guys. I think I like a couple other guys better, but I mean, just in terms of value, like he checks every box and he feels like the safest one. So like I could see myself busting on the next four guys a lot easier than Drake London, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I'll go ahead and make my pick. And funny enough, it's still in the same order. So, spoiler alert for those of you who are watching, everything on the right, these are my SuperFlex rankings. I just copied and pasted them into here. I should have shaken them up a little bit as to give a bit more of a surprise to my picks. But on this list, there are a lot of ties, right, that I kind of keep in my head. Like, for example, Drake London and Garrett Wilson, they're both tied for my 103, right? It's not shown here, but I view both of them in a similar but different light. I think they're both very talented. I think Drake London has a higher ceiling, but I think Garrett Wilson has the safest floor in this entire class. I think with Garrett Wilson, I don't love that he went to the Jets because, one, I'm not a big believer in Zach Wilson, and two, it's a very crowded offense, especially now that they also added Breece Hall. So I don't absolutely love the situation. The first 4 years, maybe even 5 years, if they do pick up that fifth-year option, which they probably end up will, if I had to guess early on, it's going to be tough for Garrett Wilson to really produce top-tier fantasy numbers in this offense, I think, because the ball is just going to be spread around so much. With that being said, he is going to be very consistent. I think a yearly finish of like wide receiver 18 to wide receiver 25 is very much realistic to say for Garrett Wilson this early in his career. He's supremely talented. He's an excellent route runner. He's fast. He's quick. The only thing I don't love about his play, and Tyler, I don't know if you spent a lot of time watching Garrett Wilson tape or even his highlights. Every single time he goes to make a catch, he does this like weird leap thing. Even if the ball is like right to his chest, he still jumps. So that kind of concerns me, but everything else about Garrett Wilson's game is fantastic. He was my wide receiver one pretty much all off season until that final month when I did change it to Jameson Williams. So I do really love the talent. I just think he's more of a safety pick than anything.
I mean, he's like you said, he's just so talented. I mean, the guy's body, his speed, his athleticism, everything about him. He's got a nose for the end zone too. He really could be a big play guy. I wish he landed with a better quarterback. I wish receivers weren't so dependent on their quarterbacks, but it is what it is. I think by the end of his rookie contract, he'll prove to be the best receiver in that New York Jets room, and he'll be the one that they extend and they give the long-term big money contract to. He's a tough football player, and he's really got a swagger to him that is hard not to like when you watch him play. He played in a loaded offense in college at Ohio State. 3 first-round picks in that offense that he was competing with. And a lot of people would argue that he was the wide receiver 1 last year in the games that all 3 of them played. It's hard to tell when you really watch that offense because all 3 of them were so talented. But I mean, Garrett Wilson, I always will wish he had a better landing spot, but
Yeah.
it's we want to avoid picking guys based on landing spot. I mean, I'd rather bet on the talent and then figure the rest out later.
Yeah, my favorite landing spot for Garrett Wilson, funny enough, was actually Atlanta. I wanted Atlanta to, I mean, I'm a Panthers fan, so I didn't want them to take Garrett Wilson, but as a fantasy fan, I wanted Wilson to go to Atlanta because I think he would have been a supreme complement to Kyle Pitts. I think those two would have coexisted really, really well in an offense that's trying to find its identity. And I think they would have found its identity between Pitts and Wilson for sure. But it's, either way, the Jets far from an ideal landing spot, but you always want to bet on talent. Fuck a landing spot if they've got supreme, really awesome talent. And Garrett Wilson is arguably the most talented wide receiver in this draft. I don't know if I love his tremendous upside for fantasy, especially in the Jets, but if you're banking on talent, Wilson's going to be the receiver you go with. But with that being said, Tyler, go ahead and take us off with 105 here.
And here I am, and I hate to follow the order, but there's no way I'm taking Kenneth Walker over Treylon Burks. Treylon Burks is a guy who can do it all. Again, I think he's got a massive ceiling. He can go up over the top of you, and again, he's got that tough guy swagger about him that he's gonna bully people, and he's gonna be a better athlete than a lot of people, even at the NFL level. You have to love his landing spot compared to the other rookie wide receivers that have went ahead of him because Ryan Tannehill is probably the most efficient out of Jared Goff, Marcus Mariota, and Zach Wilson at this point in time.
Definitely.
So I think this time next year, Treylon Burks will probably be the most expensive receiver in this class. He's clearly in the best spot. Everyone knows that. But the guy, I think he probably, to me, over Jameson Williams, I think Treylon Burks has the biggest upside in this class. I can understand why Tennessee was okay giving up A.J. Brown to get Treylon Burks because when you watch him play, he is just a rough guy that you would be miserable having to cover, and they're going to feed him the ball in Tennessee. He can do a lot of things that not only A.J. Brown could do, but I think also he's got a little bit of Debo in him. He can be a big body that takes not handoffs but like end arounds and screens and do big things with them. And he can play close to the line of scrimmage if he has to. He can also run a lot of intermediate and deep routes and go up over the top. So the fact that you've given me the ADP 101, 102, and 103 for the 101, 103, and 105, I think is awesome. And I'm going to beat you again in another video.
Yeah, we'll see, buddy. We'll revisit this video in about, well, I don't even want to say a year because it's so hard to bank on rookies already, but we'll revisit it this time next offseason and we'll see how we're progressing. But for what it's worth, so I have a rookie predictive model that I've been using since the class of 2018. There are 67 wide receivers graded. Is it 67? Why is this out of order? Yeah, 67 wide receivers that I've graded since 2018. Treylon Burks, because he does have a really, really awesome profile. He came in directly right next to DK Metcalf. Him and DK Metcalf are ranked 4 and 5 out of 67 possible wide receivers. And I know what you're thinking. If I think that highly of Treylon Burks, why didn't I take him at 102? And the answer is because Jameson Williams, Drake London, and Garrett Wilson are all in the top 8 of these top 67 rankings. So like I said, they're all in the same tier for me. I was just going for upside with Jameson Williams. But on Treylon Burks, the upside is definitely there. He's a freak of nature athlete. And one of the best things about him, like you were saying, is that he has Ryan Tannehill currently. And while you wouldn't typically use he has Ryan Tannehill as praise, he does have a better quarterback situation than any of the other guys or any of these other wide receivers right now. So that's definitely a big ups. And he really doesn't have much target competition at all. You know, they got Robert Woods, they got Austin Hooper, but there's a lot of scenarios where Treylon Burks goes out there and leads that team in reception yards and touchdowns this year. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. So with you getting Drake London and Treylon Burks, you definitely have those win now rookie receivers where I think with Jameson Williams and Garrett Wilson, I'm going more for the long term and seeing what happens with them. But I got my high upside pick and I got my floor pick. So even though you got your consensus 102 and 103, I got my diversified portfolio that I wanted to see.
Yeah, but so here's what's gonna happen is we're gonna get halfway through the season, and I'm gonna be able to trade you Traylon Burks for both Jameson Williams and Garrett Wilson, and then it's all gonna be good.
Yeah,
And
but
I'm gonna have
anyone who does that should be playing redraft because they're way too reactionary.
well, I mean, I think the point I'm almost like kind of hinting at is like if you do value Jameson Williams at the 102, like I hate to say it, but don't take him there. Like trade back because it's not
Oh
happening.
yeah.
Or like if you can't get a deal to trade back, and say, okay, like I'll take Drake London and I'll trade him to you for Jameson Williams when you need a receiver and Drake London's producing in the middle of the season, and I'll get what I want anyways, plus a pick back on top of that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point to make. I'm glad you called that out. If this were a draft and I had the 102, obviously you want to dig around. You want to try to get a sense of what your league mates want to do. Because if they have the same plan as you, then it's going to be really hard to formulate a deal. But yes, if I was sitting on the clock and I had 102, I would trade back at least 1 or 2 spots if I'm going to grab Jameson Williams because Breece Hall is going to be 101. Drake London is pretty locked and loaded as the consensus 102. I have seen the 103 fluctuate between Burks, London, and Wilson, and even Kenneth Walker, depending on who you are. So if you have a guy in this tier that you really want that badly, I wouldn't trade farther down than even the 103 because this way you can guarantee to get yourself that guy. But these guys, like I said, are all in the same tier. So if you don't have a preference and you're sitting at 102, trade 102 for the 105 or even the 106 because a lot of the rookie drafts that I see, Kenneth Walker does go top 5 just because there's always a supreme need for running back in the league. So if you have 102 and you don't love Drake London, trade back, 2 or 3, maybe even 4 spots. That's a good point.
Yeah, I think it would be a smash because I mean, if I'm looking to get Jameson Williams, like there's no way that I'm gonna be that upset if somebody at 3 or 4 does end up taking him and I end up with Garrett Wilson or Traylon Burks. So I mean, it's hard to be upset with that. And I really love Chris Olave too. So I mean, that's another thing. Like he's an NFL ready guy who's probably gonna produce a lot. I mean, we'll talk about him in a minute, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
trading from if I have the 102, I'm trading back in almost any spot, seeing if the 3, 4, or 5 want it, and then if the 6 is willing to do it to toss on a first or maybe even 2 seconds, you might even be able to swing me for that. I might do that.
Well, you brought up Chris Olave. I'm going to take Chris Olave here at 106. I'm deviating from the board. In my mind, Kenny Walker and Chris Olave are locked and loaded in the same tier for me. I have basically Breece Hall is my tier 1. The 4 receivers are tier 2, and then Olave and Walker are both here in my tier 3. And I'm going with Olave here because, like you said, he's NFL ready. He is arguably the smoothest route runner in this entire draft. He was an absolute beast in college. He doesn't profile as a guy that can be a team's wide receiver 1. I wouldn't expect a massive ceiling from him in terms of fantasy. It's also a weird situation. Like I definitely loved Chris Olave for 2022 a lot more before they brought in Jarvis Landry because for a time there, especially with Michael Thomas coming in from injury, it seemed like Chris Olave would open up week 1 with the Saints as the de facto wide receiver 1. And now he's definitely behind Jarvis Landry, at least for the short term on that depth chart. And when Michael Thomas does come back, if he ever miraculously comes back, Michael Thomas will resume his wide receiver 1 spot. The good news for Chris Olave, though, is that a Jameis Winston-led offense is going to see a lot of passing yards, especially with the Saints potentially being without Alvin Kamara for up to half the season this year. So there's going to be a ton of opportunity, ton of opportunity 4 times in a sentence. But there's a lot to like about this situation. He will go up in value after this year. There's a lot of scenarios where he does finish as, I would say, a top 2 maybe top 3 wide receiver in terms of yardage for rookies this year. So definitely a lot to like there. Plus the Jarvis Landry thing, it's a short-term contract. Michael Thomas is kind of flaky. New Orleans could be moving on from Jameis Winston in the next year or two. So you never know what that situation is going to be like. So definitely an ever-changing situation for Chris Olave. When it comes to overall talent, I think he's got an amazing football IQ, but I get the feeling he's going to be a better real life wide receiver than he is for fantasy. But with that being said, here at 106, if you're getting a guy that's putting up pretty safe, low end wide receiver 2 numbers each week with the upside to go off here and there, I don't think you can really complain about that too much at 106.
Yeah, and I love Chris Olave, the receiver. Like you said, his IQ is just so next level. He does a lot of really professional things, like as far as getting his feet down in bounds and finding the holes in the coverage, in zone coverages, and even being creative to find the end zone as well. A lot of these guys have noses for the end zone. Chris Olave is really patient in finding blocks and things like that down the field. And as far as his landing spot goes, I know I do, even though I like Jarvis Landry as a shot in the dark late in drafts, um, Jameis Winston has never been a dink and dunk kind of guy that Jarvis Landry would tend to, Jarvis Landry was probably at his best or some of his best, well, in Miami and then in Cleveland with Baker Mayfield. I think that Chris Olave is the outside receiver that Jameis Winston could tend to. I think Chris Olave's stock, I think, is going to rise a lot during the season. And you're really lucky to get a guy like him at 106 because he's going to be if nothing else, he's going to be in the league for a long time. And there's going to at least be 2 or 3, maybe 4 or even more years where he's going to be a starting piece for your roster.
Yeah, and going back to that predictive model that I was saying, Olave profiles most closely to Marquise Brown and Michael Gallup. Obviously, this model takes into account production in college, size, play style, all that good stuff. Not necessarily always going to be a 1-for-1 match. Like I probably wouldn't go out there and just outright compare Chris Olave to Michael Gallup. But the overall scores he profiles very similar to Marquise Brown and Michael Gallup. And both of those guys have shown that they can be 1,000-yard receivers. They're just not going to be anything absolutely spectacular for fantasy, but there's always going to be a place for those guys on your roster. They're always going to be those reliable guys that you could plug in your wide receiver 2 spot, set it and forget it pretty much every week. So not going to complain about getting him here at 106. And now I'd love to hear what you're going to do at 107.
Well, it feels like you kind of can't pass up on Kenny Walker here. He, even though he doesn't technically have the starting role yet in Seattle, that's one thing that I think people are underestimating is Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny was the running back 1 over the stretch of those games last season. He was better than Jonathan Taylor in that stretch. He was better than all your favorite running backs in that stretch in terms of fantasy production. But Kenneth Walker is supposed to end up taking over that lead role eventually. This is a guy who we don't know that he doesn't have a receiving ceiling, but we haven't seen it, so there's no proof of it. But I think if he ends up getting to a Josh Jacobs and Nick Chubb level, then you really got a steal here, and I like him better than taking a shot at a lot of the other guys on the board. Getting the second best running back in the class, and I think it's pretty clear that he's the second best running back in the class. There was a lot of people who thought he was the best. The guy was a beast at Michigan State. When he transferred, it just unlocked him there. They fed him the ball, and we saw what he was capable of. He's capable of being a 3-down back. I don't know if he gets there. I mean, I doubt Rashad Penny is there after this season. Chris Carson's probably gone after this season as soon as Kenneth Walker shows them that he can handle the workload. I mean, I love his play style, and I loved watching him play this past year at Michigan State. But the people who are taking him at like 103, 102 back in May, April, and things like that, I think they were kind of crazy with the wide receiver talent that we have here. But yeah, I love getting the RB2 at 107. That's awesome for me.
Yeah, our buddy Sean, who's in our league, if you're watching, shout out to Kenny Walker at 102, right, buddy? Absolutely.
I didn't mean to call him out like that.
Oh no, I did. No, I mean Kenny Walker, he's everything He's everything that an NFL team should be looking for, but is nothing that I want on my fantasy team. I mean, like you were saying, at the 107, he is kind of a no-brainer there because a Nick Chubb type of guy, they don't come along very often, but it's within the range of possibilities for Kenny Walker. And he was, I believe, what was it, the second running back taken at the NFL draft. So you know that there's definitely something there from those NFL scouts. They definitely see something that they can use, something that they could like. He has virtually no PPR upside, which is what really bothers me about him. A lot of people will defend him saying that, yes, he can catch the ball. And I get it. He's an NFL player now. He should know how to catch the ball, but it's not really in his repertoire, right? Like he's not going to go out there and even put up the same receiving numbers that we saw Jonathan Taylor put up last year. Like, I don't think that's in Kenny Walker's range of possibilities. I don't see him ever being a guy that gets more than maybe 30 targets total in a 17-game season. Like, it's just not really going to happen for him. You're going to need him to be that guy that's getting you 80 plus yards on the ground and a touchdown every single week if you want to keep him plugged into your lineup. He's going to be, I think the highest possibility for Kenny Walker is he's going to end up being like a boomer bust weekly RB2, where he's either going to finish as a top 10 guy or he's going to bottom out and be like a top 30 to 35 finisher. I don't think there's a lot of in between because there's not a lot of safety with him. So he's just going to be that boomer bust guy. But like you were saying, at 107, it's a weird class, right? Especially for the running backs. But everybody needs running backs all the time in dynasty football and fantasy football in general. And letting the second best running back fall to this point is pretty wild. So I agree. There's only one other person on this board that I would say could combat for 107, and it's Kenny Pickett, who's I'm going to take at 108. And the only reason why is because, like, if we're talking in a super flex league, Kenny Pickett's still there at 8. I don't love Pickett by any stretch of the imagination. It was an extremely late breakout. He's a very old rookie. He was in college. I think he has 5 seasons under his belt in college. The situation is a pretty good one if Pittsburgh holds on to Deontay Johnson. Surrounding him with Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, Najee Harris, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth. Obviously, they got to beef up that offensive line because Pittsburgh has one of the worst offensive lines in all of football. But the situation, the rest of the situation outside of the offensive line looks pretty good for Kenny Pickett. I see no issue with him beating out Mitch Trubisky. A lot of reports are saying that Trubisky is going to be starting week 1. I don't believe it. I think Kenny Pickett's going to take the job in training camp. I know he was drafted later in the first round, but you're not going to take a quarterback in the first round and sit him to quote unquote learn behind Mitch Trubisky. You know what I mean? So I think Pickett's going to come in. If we're talking super flex league at 108, if you need a quarterback, that's a fantastic value. There are not many classes out there where you're going to get your top rookie quarterback all the way down at 108. So yeah, I won't complain about it too much. I don't absolutely love it, but it might be the best value in the draft if he pans out to be a half decent quarterback.
Yeah, no, it really might. And the thing that's great is that, like, you're good, like you said, you're gonna have a starting quarterback or a guy who's at least starting on an NFL team for at least the next 4 seasons, 5 seasons, you know. So definitely safer than anybody else who's left on the board here. And yeah, I don't know if you remember. Yeah, I know he's old. I told you he got held back in 8th grade. His parents held him back. He was homeschooled, and his parents held him back so he could play another year of youth football. That's why he's so good. But the guy, like you said, the guy's in a pretty good situation. Got a lot of weapons around him. Got a good back behind him to take a lot of the pressure off of him. And yeah, I'm actually excited to see what he can do in Pittsburgh. He put up a really, really explosive season at Pitt last year. I mean, he just blew off the charts. Him and Jordan Addison together. I mean, it's hard to tell who was the beneficiary and who was getting leashed on. But yeah, I really like Kenny Pickett at the 108. So safe to get that quarterback production because, I mean, even if you don't like him and if he finishes as the fantasy QB 20 this year or something along those lines, 24, 23, you can probably get some value out of him and I mean, you got to think like what is I know he's not Trevor Lawrence, but what is Trevor Lawrence going for as after he finished QB 27 last year?
Yeah,
So you're gonna get value out of him, and he's gonna be an asset that you can hold on to and trade for a couple of years.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett reminds me a lot of Daniel Jones, both from a real life perspective and a fantasy perspective. I think they're going to have very similar numbers. Pickett, I wouldn't necessarily call him a dual threat quarterback, but he does have wheels. He can take it off and run with it. It's definitely not going to be the part of his game that he gets most well known for as an NFL player. But same thing with Daniel Jones. I mean, you look at him, he's not necessarily known as a dual threat quarterback, quote unquote, but he's got wheels. He can take off and run for it. He almost scored like an 80-yard touchdown, and then he tripped over his shoelace or something like that. Still one of the greatest clips of all time. But yeah, I view him in a pretty similar light to a guy like Danny Jones. Like you said, you're going to have a starting quarterback for at least the next 4 or 5 years out of him, unless he really stinks it up. Then you might only have him for 2 or 3, but not a lot of possibilities of that happening. And I think he could be a pretty decent staple for your dynasty team for a while as your, super flex spot.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think like what is Zach Wilson going to go for this year if he sucks again? I mean, he's still probably got some value as a guy who could pan out and a guy who's going to put points up on a quarterback needy team. If some guy's got Pat Mahomes and then he's got absolutely nobody behind him, if he's got whoever else, Andy Dalton behind him or something like that, who knows what situations these guys are in. But I mean, that's a spot where a team could actually say, hey, I'm getting so much production out of Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, or Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, whoever, to say that, yeah, I can take the hit on the rookie quarterback, get a mediocre QB2, and still be okay and be in contention.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here I'm gonna go with another high upside guy, Sky Moore. He's the speedy guy that Kansas City is gonna try to use to replace some of Tyreek Hill's production. I think the people that say that Sky Moore is going to be a clear-cut number one receiver in that offense by the end of the year don't agree with it, can't buy into it. I think Kansas City kind of strategically replaced Tyreek's underneath production with Juju, and hopefully they're hoping to replace his deep production with Sky Moore. Sky Moore is a guy who basically does one thing. He runs straight by you and either jumps over the top of you and takes the ball off of your helmet, or he's 5 yards behind you and he's running into the end zone. So he's a guy who's, like you said, probably going to be a boomer bust kind of guy week to week. But he's a guy who, if you end up starting him at a flex spot, he could very easily put up 20 plus points in a game in that offense, knowing what Pat Mahomes' arm is and knowing that offense needs to and does stretch the field very often.
Yeah, I have Sky Moore for 2022 currently projected as my wide receiver 52, which would be just under 9 points per game in PPR, which really isn't that bad for a rookie of Sky Moore's caliber. I agree with you. People who think Sky Moore is automatically the wide receiver 1 here in Kansas City is absolutely crazy. First off, it's Travis Kelce, right? If we're going to count a tight end as a wide receiver, in which case I think in Travis Kelce we can. But Sky Moore won't even be the second option. We were talking about this the other day. We both think that's going to be Juju this year. Juju is the quote unquote veteran in this offense. We know that he is very skilled. I would argue that, and I'm not even a big Juju guy, but I would argue that I like Juju's talent more than I like Sky Moore's talent. Not to mention, they still have Mecole Hardman out there. They have Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So those are 2 more guys that are just going to blow over the top of these defenders. And Pat Mahomes is going to basically be dancing around and just picking a different one each week. So I think we are going to see flashes of Sky Moore as a rookie, but I don't think we're going to see a ton of consistency out of him, which it's going to make it hard to slot him into those lineups as a rookie. My other concerns with Sky Moore, I'm not nearly as high on him as a lot of other people. Sky Moore, to be honest, he would probably, looking at my list, he would probably be down into like my 13 to 15 range if he didn't land in Kansas City. I was never really a big Sky Moore guy. I don't hate his talent, but I just don't love the way he plays in terms for fantasy. He profiles extremely similar to guys like Rondale Moore and Henry Ruggs in my predictive model in terms of overall score. And honestly, those aren't terrible comps for him. He's kind of like a mix of both of those guys. He's got the speed of Ruggs, but he has also got the dink and dunk ability of Rondale Moore. So definitely an interesting prospect, and arguably landed in the best, if not the second best situation of any of these wide receivers in this entire rookie class. So 109, that's pretty typical for Sky Moore. If you're someone out there, because I've seen Sky Moore ranked as high as like the wide receiver 2 for some people. If that's you, relax, because I know his situation is awesome, but Pat Mahomes isn't going to magically make Sky Moore a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy. He's going to be very middling. He's going to have tons of opportunity to break out in his career for sure, but I don't see him turning into that year after year top 20 kind of guy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's where we have to really put our expectations. Like we have to think anybody within the top 5, from the 2 to 5 range that we have, or 2 to 6 even probably right here. If any of those guys were drafted to Kansas City, they were probably going as the 102, then the wide receiver 1 in the class. So Sky Moore goes to the best landing spot, and he only really breaks the 109 for us. So I mean, well, like you said, boomer bust kind of guy.
Exactly. Okay, so that was your pick at 109. I'm going to go at 110. I'm a massive James Cook guy, so I'm taking James Cook here. Honestly, I've argued with myself whether or not I wanted to catapult James Cook all the way up to right behind Chris Olave in my rankings and move Walker back to my RB3, because I do really like James Cook. I know we didn't see a ton of workload out of him in college, and I think that's okay. I have said this in almost every single video that we've put out, but I'm a big believer that the workhorse role in the NFL is slowly fading away. And while there is always going to be a few workhorses in the NFL, doesn't matter if it's tomorrow or 20 years from now, there's always going to be a few. I think there's going to be a majority of the teams moving to a split backfield. And that's exactly what Buffalo is doing in drafting James Cook. So I can see James Cook having a fairly successful rookie season. He projected very highly for me on my running back predictive model. He's just in between DeAndre Swift and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and honestly, both of those guys. I wouldn't say James Cook is as talented as DeAndre Swift, but I can see a little bit of Clyde Edwards-Helaire in him. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he gets a lot of hate, but you got to remember, as a rookie, he was a top 22 running back in PPR. He definitely fell short of expectations since he was going 101, if not 102 in a lot of leagues, but really not anything terrible. And if that's the kind of upside that you're getting out of James Cook at 110, I'll gladly take that. I can see Devin Singletary owning first and second down. I would say he'll get at least a 60 to 65% attempt share on the ground, or on the first and second down. But I can also see James Cook seeing, 25 to 30% back there. And I think he is going to have 75% plus of those third down opportunities, which in fantasy football today, where most people are playing PPR, that is supremely, supremely important. This year, I have James Cook projected finishing as the overall RB32 as a rookie, which would be a middle range RB3. And that's perfectly fine for a bye week filler. That's perfectly fine for a flex guy. Or if you are one of those leagues that do have 3 RB spots, that's an RB3 right there. So I'm getting that at 110. I think his overall upside is only going to get bigger. And Devin Singletary I believe he's in a contract year this year. So who knows? If something happens with Singletary and James Cook can go out there and prove that somehow he is the guy, he could play himself into a majority, even bigger role as soon as 2023. So at 110, I love the upside with Cook.
Yeah, the one thing I just can't get past with James Cook is just his size. And I think that, obviously that's a lot of people's problem, and that's why he is being drafted so low. He's only like 185 pounds. I don't know if I can't remember a running back that we've seen stay fantasy relevant for longer than a couple years that was 185 or less than that. That's really crazy to me. But the one really bright spot, I think, is he's in a great landing spot. And none of those running backs in Buffalo are there for the long term right now. Even Devin Singletary is on a short-term contract. And in a year out, when you look at it, James Cook is the only one that's on that roster that's signed, aside from what's his name, Zach Moss, who we know, hasn't done anything and probably won't, So While I like the upside at 110, I think I would like to stay away from James Cook. I know there's a lot of people that like him and he's got that following, but I don't know. I'm off it. I just don't see him being a long term guy at the position.
See, my biggest issue with people who hate on James Cook are the people that point out his size because there's a
Well,
lot of
do
conflicting
something.
reports. Well, there's a lot of conflicting reports as to what his size actually is. And a lot of people go with the generic, oh, he's 5'10, 190. At the combine, James Cook was 5'11, 199. You know who, not that I'm comparing the two guys, but you know who is another quote unquote undersized guy who was the exact same height and weighed in a whole 3 pounds heavier than James Cook? My buddy Christian McCaffrey. And he has been, obviously we've seen some injuries, but that's because they gave him fucking 400 plus touches a year, which was always a stupid thing for the Panthers to do. I won't get started on that, but that's my thing. If James Cook had even weighed in 1 pound heavier and he registered as a 200-pound running back, that would have immediately surpassed him in a lot of people's predictive models. The biggest knock, and I see this all the time on Twitter, people are always putting together these predictive models that have a really severe hard cutoff. And it's like, oh, well, running backs that weigh less than 200 pounds have this whatever bust rate. And it's like, okay, but yeah, what about 199? He's 1 pound off from hitting your threshold. So I don't buy into the whole he's too small kind of thing. Devin Singletary, while he does have a much better BMI, he's got like 3 solid inches on Devin Singletary. So I think it's all good. I think his size is just way overplayed. And I'm gonna go with what was measured at the combine, not what I'm reading on my fantasy league website.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't get behind him. It's too tough for me. Like you have to think Christian McCaffrey put on 20 pounds uh after he left the combine. Like his first offseason, put on over 20 pounds before he got to the NFL. And the odds are
He's,
that James yeah,
well,
and
I mean,
odds are that James couldn't
McCaffrey.
do that.
Well, McCaffrey is a freak athlete, and we know that. But we also know Dalvin Cook is a freak athlete. Like, not that I'm comparing James Cook to Dalvin Cook, but obviously they share the same genes. If Dalvin Cook can be a big bruising guy and put on that sort of weight, I don't see why James Cook couldn't as well. And obviously, I'm not a genetics expert. I don't know how all that shit works, but it sounds good. So we're going to move on and I'll let you pick at 111.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take Jahan Dotson here. I think he's clearly at like the top of this tier. I probably would have taken him at the 110 if I was in that spot over James Cook. And then James Cook at the 111, really close for me. But Jahan Dotson is a guy who really broke out at Penn State pretty early on. He put up 488 yards his freshman season and up to 884 sophomore year or junior year rather, and then 1100 his senior year. So I totally just misspoke there. 488 his sophomore year, 884 his junior year, and 1182 his senior year, and 12 touchdowns in that senior year too. So he was competing with some NFL guys in that Penn State offense early on, like Pat Fryermuth. He's a guy who he was really productive. Had a career average at Penn State of like 15 yards per reception. He was also a guy who did actually carry the ball a handful of times, which was interesting. But yeah, I love Jahan Dotson here. The Commanders were really invested in him, drafting him so high in the first round that we usually I can't remember the last time we've seen a round one NFL draft receiver fall back to the back end of round one in a rookie draft.
I can name one for you, and it's Brandon Ayuk, who was the wide receiver 15 overall in the last half of last season. And it's a common mistake for a lot of people to let Jahan Dotson fall so far. I like Jahan Dotson's talent more than I like Sky Moore's talent, that's for sure. But I like Sky Moore's situation infinitely more than I like Jahan Dotson's. With that being said, Terry McLaurin recently re-signed in Washington. I think it was, a 3-year extension, something along those lines. So Terry McLaurin's going to be there until, the 2025 season. And I think that's fantastic for Dotson. You know, I'm not a big believer in Carson Wentz, but I don't absolutely hate the guy. And I do think Washington could be on a short list to draft an early round quarterback next year because that's just how it goes. They also just drafted Sam Howell in the 5th round. And I know we don't normally look at 5th round quarterbacks too much, but I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see Sam Howell step on the field at some point in 2022. So who knows? Maybe that works out. But Jahan Dotson is going to be a fantastic complementary wide receiver to Terry McLaurin. I think Dotson was definitely the right pick for Washington there. I think he's a better real life wide receiver than he's going to be for fantasy for sure. I don't think he's going to have any sort of like week winning upside. You know, obviously occasionally you're going to get a massive game out of any player. But I think Dotson is going to be that guy he's always going to play second fiddle to Terry McLaurin for sure. I don't think anyone can dispute that Terry McLaurin is a better receiver than John Dotson. But he is going to have a very solid role. He'll have a ton of opportunity his rookie year. The one thing that does concern me with this immediate situation is that I'm also a big Curtis Samuel fan, and I could see both of the role that Curtis Samuel had in Carolina a couple years ago is what I envision his role being in Washington, especially since he basically just followed Ron Rivera. But with that being said, that was kind of the role that I saw Jahan Dotson getting with pretty much any NFL team that he went to. Like you said, you know, he knows how to rush the ball. He can take the ball around in the jet sweeps and all that fun stuff. And he's a very dinky and dunky kind of guy, and he can juke past you pretty easily. So it'll be interesting to see how it works in Washington with Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel sharing the field. But I do see a very solid receiver coming out of this. He's probably more of a wide receiver 3 with the occasional wide receiver 2 week. But at 111, plus he profiles extremely safe as a first round real life pick. There's no one else that's left on the board that I would even consider taking over Dotson here. So I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, just the investment alone out of Washington kind of guarantees him opportunity over the next 3 or 4 years. So, granted, he could easily bust out. I mean, you're only investing the 111 on him, so you're getting really good value at 111 in this draft.
Hey, well, you know who the 111 was a couple years ago? It was either Justin Jefferson or T. Higgins, and for whatever that's worth, I mean, hey, if you landed either of those guys at 111, you're pretty fucking pumped.
Yeah, and at the time, you probably thought to yourself, hey, T. Higgins is going to Cincinnati. That's an awful landing spot, you know? And now here we are, and we're looking at them like they're one of the top 5 offenses in the league. So
very true. And bringing up Cincinnati, that's another upside with Dotson. If he's always going to be playing second fiddle to Terry McLaurin, Dotson's never going to have the top coverage on him, right? So that's another good thing for his opportunities. But I'll go ahead and move on here. And at pick 12, there's a couple of guys that I'm considering here. I am doing battle whether or not I want David Bell or whether I want Rachaad White. I do like Rachaad White's talent. I liked him a lot better before Leonard Fournette re-signed in Tampa Bay. I think Fournette re-signed first, so that's kind of a statement that I put there, but that's okay. Anyway, I'm going to go with David Bell. I like Rachaad White's talent, but I hate his situation. With Leonard Fournette being there for another 2 years, White is going to be very hard-pressed to find significant playing time. And from what I've learned in fantasy football, if your running back doesn't break out by the end of his second year, it's probably not coming. And Rachaad White's not going to have much of an opportunity his first year. Could change a little bit next year, but he's still going to be behind Lenny unless Fournette completely falls apart this year. So I just don't love having to wait for 3 years on my running back investment when the younger the running back is, the better production you're seemingly going to get from him in fantasy. So that's my thought process there. But I love David Bell. David Bell was a 3rd round pick to Cleveland. And I thought I was one of those people. It was before the combine. I was wholeheartedly believing that David Bell belonged in tier 1. I thought he was going to be a 1st round pick. He's fucking awesome. His numbers at Purdue were absolutely insane. Kid was absolutely electric, and he was so reliable for them, even as a rookie. And he was their top receiver pretty much every single year that he was at Purdue. He was absolutely amazing. He's going to go to Cleveland. and he's gonna take the Jarvis Landry role. David Bell, funny enough, even before the combine, I profiled him extremely similar to Jarvis Landry, and he put up the same shitty ass combine as Jarvis Landry. He was like the exact type of like short yard reliable guy that could turn around and take off for it, exactly like Jarvis Landry. And now he's going to the Browns to replace Jarvis Landry. I would not be the least bit surprised to see him open up the year as a starting wide receiver. Obviously, Amari Cooper's their one. DPJ is going to be on the other side, but David Bell is going to line up on the inside a lot. And there is a lot of things that they can do with him. And the really cool thing is that if Deshaun Watson gets suspended and they put Jacoby Brissett in there, Jacoby Brissett's best friend could easily become David Bell, because Bell is so, like I said, Bell is so reliable, and a guy like Brissett is going to need someone to kind of make those dink and dunky passes too. So I could see him having a very successful rookie year, and I can see him having just a very successful career in general. I compared him to Jarvis Landry, and that's exactly what I say is his fantasy ceiling is about Jarvis Landry. We've seen Jarvis Landry have 100 catches in a season. We've seen him go over 1,000 yards. We've never seen him really put up an insane amount of touchdowns, but that's okay, because for a handful of seasons there, Jarvis Landry was a fantasy wide receiver one, and that's the upside that you're getting in David Bell. And honestly, I think the floor is pretty safe too. I think he could easily be, a 4 to 6 weekly catch kind of guy as soon as his rookie year. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. So I think he's a very safe pick at wide receiver 12. And I think he's also a very good upside pick at 12 here as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to be in disagreement with you about this season because I think one of the things that Amari Cooper does really well is run short routes, and he can definitely take up that short to intermediate part of the field. But long term, Amari Cooper's only on a 1-year deal there. If David Bell can even show a semblance to the Cleveland front office that he can put up a fraction of the production that Amari Cooper is going to, then there's no reason for them to re-sign Amari Cooper. And all of a sudden, David Bell has a wide open door to turn into Deshaun Watson's number 1 receiver. And we've seen even when Deshaun Watson lost DeAndre Hopkins, he was putting up productive numbers for his receivers. So David Bell, in terms of career outlook, I really like it. This year, I don't know how prominent he's going to be. I think he could, like you said, he could be a guy who ends up giving us 1,000-yard seasons or 100-catch seasons because he is that dink and dunk kind of guy. And that is really awesome to have in a PPR format. You would almost rather that. So I really do. I love David Bell there. And you're probably going to be happy because Rachaad White's going to fall to you at 14 too as well.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised to hear you say that at all. I know he's not your guy. But before we move on from David Bell, I got to bring up the predictive model again because I forgot that I updated it a few months ago, and now that I found it again, I'm obsessed with it. So in the top 36 wide receivers since 2018, only 2 receivers ended up in the top 36 that were 3rd-round picks. Everyone else is a 1st or a 2nd-round pick. It's David Bell, and the other one is Michael Gallup. So for what that's worth, they don't profile as the same guy. Don't get it twisted. They are not even close to being the same player. But David Bell profiles extremely well. He was extremely productive, and I'm very excited to see what he can do in the National Football League. But we are now officially into round 2 of our mock draft here. So Tyler, who are we going with?
So here I'm gonna snag up Aaron Rodgers, wide receiver. I don't love it, but he's a big body guy. At the 201, you kind of have to love it. He went a little bit earlier than this in a lot of drafts. So while I don't enjoy his athleticism and his talent, I think Aaron Rodgers can make that work. And he's the guy. He's the only 1st-round receiver that Green Bay has like pretty much ever invested in my lifetime. So
he was
felt good
2nd round, right?
Oh yeah, right. Wait, was he? He was early 2nd round, wasn't he?
Yeah, early 2nd round receiver. He was round 2, pick 2, so pretty damn close to being a 1st-round receiver.
Yeah, my bad. But yeah, so pretty much, essentially, what is a de facto 1st-round pick? The value of pretty much a 1st-round pick. It's the biggest investment that Green Bay has made at the receiver position in a long time. So they must have felt some type of way about him. I'll take that kind of upside if he can pan out. I mean, I'm not relying on him at all. This is again, I mean, we're in the second round of a rookie draft. This is a lot of this is just going to be who do I see giving me upside, and
Yeah.
who's and a lot of it's going to come down to landing spots too with these guys because the talent didn't get them into the first round of the rookie draft. So, I mean, their landing spots are going to be really important here.
Yeah, in terms of talent, if we're talking about the wide receivers, if I'm picking for talent, I'm taking George Pickens between him and Christian Watson. But if I'm picking for the upside, if I'm picking for the situation, I'm going Christian Watson all day. I could completely reverberate your words. I'm not a big Christian Watson fan. I don't like his ability to play football. Great athlete, but just because he's a great athlete doesn't mean he's going to be a great football player. His college stats were not impressive. I know North Dakota isn't exactly a gleaming beacon for production. So I really tried. I really tried my off-season research not to hold his statistics against him. But you have to, right? Because if you're going to be, oh, go ahead, Ty.
I was just gonna say, one thing. One of his seasons got cut short to COVID. They played like 6 games, and they played like spring ball. I think it was his junior year. That's why he went back for his senior season, because his junior year got cut short. Obviously, you can't really play as a junior and then get drafted and go right into mini camp in that 3 months. So I think that did might have had something to do with the stats.
Well, I speaking of that, though, I think that was the best thing that could have happened in his draft stock. I don't think Christian Watson would have even been a day 2 pick last year because there really wasn't any buzz on him. This is the big concern for me with Christian Watson, what I'm about to say, is he did not become a name in the media until the Senior Bowl. And if you go back, I looked it up, I think back to 2018 or 2019. So if you look at the last 3, 4, maybe even 5 years, and you look at the receivers who didn't have any sort of name for themselves until the Senior Bowl, it's not a very impressive list. I don't think any of them, maybe one of them, had actually had some sort of success in the National Football League. If Christian Watson went to almost any other situation, I would be out on him entirely. The only reason why I agree with you that Christian Watson should be an early second round pick is because he has Aaron Rodgers thrown in the ball, and there's no target competition, right? There's I forget if he's a 4th or a 5th round receiver, but Romeo Doubs, who also got drafted to Green Bay, he's actually pretty good, but he was drafted 2 or 3 rounds after Christian Watson. Alan Lazard is not a very good football player. I know a lot of people are on the Alan Lazard hype train to be Aaron Rodgers' wide receiver 1 this year, and I would give him the odds favorite to be Aaron Rodgers' wide receiver 1 just because Rodgers has played with him before, and we know that trust is a big thing for Rodgers. But Christian Watson isn't too far behind him in the pecking order, in my opinion. And since they did invest such an early pick in him, there is going to be a ton of opportunity. So he's the guy that I'm looking for that's going to have rookie year upside. And I'm probably going to sell high, maybe even as soon as the end of his rookie year before Aaron Rodgers retires, because God only knows what that's going to turn into. You have a average at best wide receiver in Christian Watson losing Aaron Rodgers. I'm not excited for that day. So I would buy him early here and then sell him for a lot more later on.
One thing that I think really makes him appealing is just how dominant he was in college. I mean, granted, it was North Dakota State. He had 800 out of their 2,200 receiving yards, and he had 7 out of their 21 touchdowns. So, I mean, granted, that's what you want to see from a guy going to a small school. You want to see him be the clear number 1 there. But he's just a guy who's kind of a shot in the dark to me. He was just in a good situation who made the most out of a pretty bad situation in college. So I mean, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to for me at least, it goes back to the whole contested catch thing and just how high of a bust rate those guys have. Christian Watson just gives me some serious N'Keal Harry vibes, and I don't love that, especially since I was someone who I didn't actually get burned by N'Keal Harry. I jumped ship before game 1 of the season, luckily, but I was very close to being burned by that N'Keal Harry debacle. But anyway, we'll go ahead and move on to our 14th pick of this rookie mock draft. And kind of alluded to it already, but I'm going to go ahead and take Rachaad White. I've been taking him in the top 14, top 15 of pretty much every single rookie draft that I've been in. I love the upside for him. Leonard Fournette, he's getting older. He's 27. If he goes down, there's no one else in that backfield. I mean, they have Keyshawn Vaughn, who is obviously a failed project, has not seen any sort of significant playing time in the last couple of years, and couldn't even beat out Ronald Jones for any sort of significant carries. And we all know Ronald Jones is not the greatest. So I think if something happens to Leonard Fournette, Rachaad White is the immediate beneficiary. I know Gio Bernard is there for another year, but fuck Gio Bernard. He's like 40. I'm not worried about him. Even on third downs, I think Rachaad White easily surpasses Giovanni Bernard, at least by the midway point of his rookie season, for those third down opportunities. So I think at best with Rachaad White, as a rookie, we're looking at a guy who has maybe a 15% share on those first and second downs. I don't think he's going to get a lot of meaningful carries if Fournette's healthy, but I could see him getting, maybe a third, somewhere between a third and a half of the probably closer to a third of the opportunities on third downs. So he can theoretically make a name for himself as a rookie, but the situation isn't good. With that being said, the talent is definitely there. He profiled extremely well in my predictive model. In fact, he actually beat out both James Cook and Kenny Walker in my predictive model, and scored very similar to Antonio Gibson, which is always something that you like to see. So love the talent, hate the situation. Draft capital is half decent, so he went on day 2, so you got to love that. And he's playing with Tom Brady for at least a year or two. Fournette could be an injury prone. I don't know. I'm betting on talent here. The situation will be what the situation be.
Yeah, like you said, situation is what situation is. Leonard Fournette, we saw he was contemplating retirement before the season, before Tom Brady came back. So that could be a big door opener for Rachaad White. One thing that worries me is that he was in a completely shared backfield at Arizona State. He didn't even have over half the rushing yards for his school, which worries me in terms of dominating really. But he did have 43 catches as well, so there is some upside there. I mean, he's a guy who he just wasn't all that productive just because he didn't really get the volume in college. He had a good average yard per touch. I mean, he had 5.5 yards per carry, which is pretty good, and 10 yards per catch too, which is really solid. I worry about where he came from, the competition that he faced at Arizona State, and just the fact that he couldn't dominate that backfield. But like I said, the doors could swing wide open for him at any moment if Leonard Fournette goes down or if he retires next year.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with him is that, he was still a 1,000-yard rusher this year. He does have that. He definitely has the PPR upside, right? Catching 43 passes out of the backfield. That's always something that you love to see out of your college players. And you can't discount the fact that he did score 15 touchdowns in only 11 games. So he was averaging over a touchdown a game, which is obviously something that you love to see. I just think, like I was saying, I love the talent. Situation in college wasn't the best. Situation as a pro isn't the best. It's going to change. I don't know if it's going to change for better. I don't know if it's going to change for worse. But one thing's for sure, he's probably going to be, or 9 times out of 10, he's going to be my pick here with what's left on the board. But I'll go ahead and shift to you. So go ahead with pick 203.
So I'm more than happy to take George Pickens here. Georgia's number 1 wide receiver.
As you should be.
Yeah, I think he can sneak his way into the back end of the first round of a lot of rookie drafts. A lot of people thought at some point during this college football season that he could have been the most talented receiver in this draft. We saw 2 of his seasons get cut short by injury, which sucks to see and not something you want to see going into the NFL. But that is really priced in here at this point at the 203. When you're getting a guy who is talented, who was a big name for a while, just fell down the board. But I mean, taking him at the 203, this guy was projected as like a mid to early first rounder for a while there, for like a couple months during his final season there at Georgia.
Yeah, George Pickens is insanely talented. If he didn't find himself if he just wasn't such a hothead out there, I think he could have snuck into the first round of the NFL draft easily. But there were, not only injury concerns, but there were a lot of kind of on the field red flags when it came to George Pickens and his temper. I think getting him at pick 15 is definitely a really good value, especially because I really don't believe in Chase Claypool. I think George Pickens could walk in and be the wide receiver 2 in week 1 on that offense. And I don't have a ton of faith in them that they'll be able to keep Deontay Johnson around, because it seems like they had entered contract talks and things were just falling apart. So there's a very clear path for George Pickens to be the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver 1 as soon as, next season of 2023. So between that and between the talent, he is definitely a no-brainer at this point on the board. He's a guy that is, I have a pretty big tier in terms of this, right? Like, I would say this tier goes from David Bell all the way down to maybe even John Mechie, right, for me. So it's a very big tier. I was very, very tempted to take Pickens at 14, actually, instead of Rachaad White, but went with my gut there. But yeah, George Pickens could very well, because he's falling to the 12th pick at the earliest in a lot of leagues. He could be the steal of the draft this year for sure, for many people out there.
Yeah, and it wouldn't even be a surprise either, right? We could look back on this a year from now and be like, how could we be so dumb to take David Bell over George Pickens? Like, we saw it coming all along and we second guessed ourselves, but that's the entire community, so we won't feel stupid alone.
Exactly. So I'm going to go ahead and make my pick here at pick 16 overall. I'm taking Trey McBride. I love Trey McBride. He's fucking awesome. He had 1,100 yards and 90 catches as a senior out of Colorado State. I don't care what league you're in. If you're a tight end and you're putting up a 90 catch, 1,100 yard season, you're probably going to be an absolute beast in the National Football League. He was a day 2 pick, goes to a really good situation. And I know what you're thinking. They just re-signed Zach Ertz to a pretty big deal. Zach Ertz is there through 2025. Well, they have an out on Zach Ertz's contract at the end of the 2023 season. Zach Ertz is already, I believe, 32 years old. And even though he played really well last year, we don't necessarily know how well he's going to hold up. We saw a very bad 2021 out of him, and he did not look like the same player out there. Even when he shifted to Arizona, he did look really good, but he had a pretty good supporting cast, and I don't think he looked as good as he once was with the Philadelphia Eagles a few years ago. So I can definitely see Zach Ertz being out of Arizona as soon as the end of 2023, but even if he's not, it's perfectly fine. Trey McBride, to me, funny enough, profiled kind of like Dallas Goedert did to me. And it's just so funny to me that Zach Ertz was ahead of Dallas Goedert, and then Dallas Goedert proved himself, and the Eagles moved on from Zach Ertz. That's exactly what's going to happen to Trey McBride. Tight ends, you're not going to get a Kyle Pitts every year. You're not going to get a Kyle Pitts every 5 years. That is a rarity, right? And we kind of had 2 last year because Pat Freiermuth had a really big rookie year too. Trey McBride's not going to do that. 1, because of the situation, and 2, because he is more of a developmental piece than either of those 2 guys. But with that being said, it takes most tight ends at least 2, maybe even 3 seasons to finally break out in the NFL. The tight end, you could argue, is the most difficult position in the National Football League outside of the quarterback position because there's so much to it. They literally need to do every single thing on that field. They need to know every single play. They need to know where they need to be at all times, and they need to be a good blocker or else they're not getting on that field. And I think McBride is going to really excel. I think he's going to learn at a very fast pace. He's a very capable blocker, and the fact that he's going to be tied with Kyler Murray for the foreseeable future is definitely a 2 thumbs up for me. So more than happy to take McBride here. He is the number 1 tight end in this draft class by far, leaps and bounds. And yeah, I'm happy to get him at the 4th pick of the 2nd round.
Yeah, I like Trey McBride too. Like you said, developmental piece. And not everybody can be Kyle Pitts and hop in and see that kind of target share. It just doesn't happen like that for tight ends, really. I agree with you. I think Zach Ertz is kind of on his way out there in Arizona. I mean, he's only going to be able to keep up with these young guys for so long. And I mean, by the 3rd year of his career, Trey McBride could very easily be a top 10 and weekly starting tight end in your lineup. that is going to help you keep up with the rest of the league at in the middle of the second round. So getting that kind of value is really good. I'm really in agreement with you.
Yeah, I love McBride there. I mean, I do really like Isaiah Spiller, as you can see by the board. I even do really like John Mechie, but I mean, there's so much scarcity at the tight end position. We talk about it every time we hop on a video, and we even mention tight ends. You want those young upside guys. If you're not going to have Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce or Kyle Pitts on your team, you want these young tight ends that profile extremely well, that are going to find themselves in a half decent situation, and give it a couple years, and that's going to be exactly what Trey McBride is. So going to grab him, stick him on my taxi squad, and then I'll let you pick at 205.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a guy who I think is going to have a pretty good role this year in LA, number 15 on the board there, Isaiah Spiller. Austin Eckler is getting older. Granted, I think Austin Eckler is probably going to have a top 5, top 4 running back season this year. Isaiah Spiller is going to start to chip into that first and second down workload. We saw in college that he can handle that. He was a volume back in college. I like a lot about him. For a while, he was the RB2 in this class. Fell down after having a poor combine. But yeah, I mean, the guy's got the size to be an NFL running back. And while I don't think he's going to be a full-time starter, this is going to be a guy who you're probably going to be able to plug into your lineup, and he might see some goal line work as well for Los Angeles. I mean, he's going to be in a really high-powered offense that's going to be at the goal line all the time. And granted, that offense is pretty crowded right now, and Austin Eckler does do a good job of being creative down there. I think Isaiah Spiller, there's plenty of room to go around for Isaiah Spiller.
So let me know if you think I'm out of bounds with saying this. For the record, I'm a big Isaiah Spiller guy. I went on the record. I told Tyler, however many months ago, that Isaiah Spiller at one point was my RB1, even ahead of Breece Hall, which obviously was a mistake. And luckily we corrected that process, well before the NFL draft. But there was a solid amount of time where I was a massive Isaiah Spiller fan. I was very disappointed to not see him go on day 2. That was definitely a surprise. But regardless, went on day 3, nothing we can do about it. But do you think it would be out of bounds to say that his fantasy ceiling, and I'm not saying this year because Austin Eckler owns that backfield right now, right? I would say his overall fantasy ceiling is to end up kind of like a Chase Edmonds type of guy.
I think that would be a really realistic expectation for him. Could he be better than that? Of course. I mean, who knows? But I think that'd be really realistic. I think honestly, Chase Edmonds is probably a little bit more talented than Isaiah Spiller. But yeah, that's really.
I agree from a talent standpoint. I'm definitely going Edmonds every day. I've always been a big Chase Edmonds fan, but I think in terms of what we've seen from the first 4 or 5 years of Chase Edmonds' NFL career, I can see a very, very similar career arc, right? You look, I believe Chase Edmonds started his career behind David Johnson when he was still actually good for Arizona. And David Johnson is exactly, I mean, he was a slightly better runner, slightly worse receiver, but he was very similar to what Austin Eckler is for the LA Chargers is. So, and it's funny because I didn't even make the comparison of situations until just now. So it's funny that I brought up Chase Edmonds. But yeah, something like that where you're going to have a couple of good weeks here and there of top 15 play, but for the most part, unless an injury happens on the offense, i.e. Austin Eckler, or if somehow Spiller completely takes over, in the next couple of years, his fantasy value is probably going to be like a low end RB2 in PPR leagues, just like Chase Edmonds.
Yeah, he could even really have a career arc. Now that you mentioned, if Austin Eckler gets hurt, he could kind of be a similar value to a guy like Alexander Mattison, where he maybe gets 4 or 5 carries on an average game when Dalvin Cook or when Austin Eckler's there. And then when they're hurt, all of a sudden they're blown up because the touches have to go somewhere. So
exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot to like. And we're getting into the territory where it doesn't really matter who you're taking, because I don't want to say it's all a crapshoot because we are still in the second round. But the 2022 NFL draft class, especially from a fantasy perspective, is about as shallow as they come. not nearly as deep as it's going to be next year. Even 2024 is going to be deeper. 2021 and 2020 were both deeper than this class. So it's just a weird class, and that's something that you got to remember here. But I do think we are still kind of in one of the higher tiers with John Mechie, which is exactly who I'm going to take. So I love a lot about John Mechie. The only thing I don't love is that he's coming off of the injury, which I believe is an ACL. But there are reports out there that he could be on the field as soon as training camp. Would definitely love to see that. But we'll just have to kind of roll with the punches as those come. But John Mechie, he'll factor in as the immediate, when he's healthy, he'll factor in probably as the immediate wide receiver too in that offense behind Brandon Cooks. I know Nico Collins has a bit of a fan club, but in terms of talent, in terms of speed, in terms of big playability, it's John Mechie across the board. John Mechie is basically Houston's finally getting their replacement for Will Fuller in John Mechie. He is a big play wide receiver. As a junior at Alabama, he had 96 catches for 1,142 yards and 8 touchdowns. And even as a sophomore in Alabama, he had 55 catches, 916 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Those are very good statistics to have, especially on a team like Alabama, where only their best players are actually going to touch the ball. And John Mechie really showed up and showed out there. Definitely a lot to love about his talent. And yeah, like I said, he is one of those speedy guys. Houston hasn't had that since Will Fuller. There's going to be a ton of opportunity for him in this offense. And one thing's for sure, the quarterback situation is, and I'm not saying this as a bad thing on Davis Mills, but the quarterback situation is not going to get worse for Houston anytime soon. They're either going to roll with Davis Mills, or they'll be able to draft a top tier quarterback next year if they finish bottom 5 in the league again. So a ton to like within Houston in the coming years, especially since they have, Cleveland's picks and soul for the next 3 years. So tons of talent coming to Houston. They'll surround John Mechie. And I think we're going to look back at this draft in 2 or 3 years and say that he could arguably be a bigger steal than George Pickens, because he's going way too late. And I'm probably taking him a little bit earlier than some people here at 206.
Yeah, and there's something about those Alabama receivers where they just come out really polished and really well coached, And he's going to a spot where he's got an easy path to targets. And he's also a guy who has spent a lot of time in kind of tandem role in Alabama when he was with Jameson Williams. He was the number 2 there, and he thrived in that role. So he's a guy who I think could end up being like a yearly wide receiver 2 type guy. I actually like the Will Fuller comp. I like that a lot. I think that could be a really similar career arc for those 2 guys. But the easy path to targets, I really like. The same reason why we've liked Brandon Cooks all these years, and he's kind of been quarterback proof, is because he's always been in really good spots to see a lot of targets. So I could also see something similar happening for John Mechie, because Brandon Cooks is getting old. And I think it's probably going to be a while before Houston makes a really, really significant investment at the receiver spots, considering they just got rid of DeAndre Hopkins and Deshaun Watson. So I think it's probably going to be a while before that offense is really totally rebuilt, and it's just going to be who's the most talented, and that's who's going to get the ball all the time there.
Absolutely. So who you going with here at 19 overall?
So here I'm gonna reach a little bit down the board, not too far, but I'm gonna go with Jalen Tolbert. I saw you were clicking that before.
Already knew.
You
Dallas homer, you.
Yeah, that might be a little bit of a homer move, but there's just so many vacated targets in that offense, and I can tell you I'm pretty much high on Jalen Tolbert for all the same reasons why I'm high on CeeDee Lamb. Cedric Wilson and Amari Cooper are both gone, and that's a lot of vacated targets there. And I think Dak Prescott's a really good quarterback, and I think Kellen Moore's a really good offensive coordinator. And they had the number 1 offense in the league last year, and walking in right now, I can't really trust James Washington to be a more productive receiver than Jalen Tolbert. Michael Gallup's going to be out for half the season, so Jalen Tolbert really is going to get a lot of opportunity early on, a lot of chance to develop and build rapport with Dak, and I think that's gonna work out really well for him. Because even when Michael Gallup comes back, we haven't seen Michael Gallup put up a full season in a long time. I don't have a stat to tell you. I haven't looked that up, but I just know he comes back for a couple games and gets hurt. That's basically been the story of the last year and a half, 2 years. As much as I love Michael Gallup, I think Jalen Tolbert could eventually take his spot. I know they just did extend him, but I mean, I think Jalen Tolbert's a guy who's talented enough, and Dallas has always done a really good job in the draft. I don't know if you've like paid attention to that, but yeah, historically speaking, over the last 5-10 years, Dallas just does really well drafting all across the board. They find value in deep rounds, and I'm gonna trust those guys in that front office over myself to evaluate the guys that are left on the board, and I'll go with Jalen Tolbert.
Yeah, and that's a fine process to have. One of the best pieces of advice that anyone could ever give anyone else in dynasty football is that you don't know more than these NFL scouts, right? And if you're getting to the point on the board where you're looking at it and you're like, all right, who the fuck is Kyle Phillips? I didn't know his name until the draft a couple months ago, right? Like once you get down to the honestly, even at this point in the draft, when there's not a lot of name value, there's not a lot of study that you might have done on a lot of these guys, totally fine to go with, the NFL scouts that you trust the most. And like you said, Dallas does draft pretty well. They draft offense very well for sure. So definitely can't complain with that process. I think Jalen Tolbert, I don't think he'll open up week 1 as the wide receiver 2. I think they'll give the nod to James Washington just because of the whole veteran thing. I would like to see Tolbert do it because I think Tolbert is more talented than James Washington without a question. But we'll see what happens and how they make him, quote unquote, earn it. But I do think
there's still another receiver spot on the field there, even if James Washington is over him for the first 6 weeks. So that volume's going to come somewhere.
No, and that's very true. And I was actually going to say I do think by midway through the year he'll be at worst the wide receiver 3 in that offense. So definitely a lot to like. I do like his talent. He did not profile exceptionally well in any stretch of the imagination, but when I was doing my film study, and I usually do film study on the top 30 to 40 prospects each year, and then the rest of them I kind of just let my models take care of for me. But Tolbert is a guy that I have both analytical numbers on and a film thought. And while he wasn't necessarily there for analyticals, I loved his film. I don't know what it was, but like he had it. Like he looked nice and comfortable out there. He was nice and reliable. Not an elite receiver, but he's the kind of guy that's always going to step out onto the football field and he's going to do his job. And I love that at the later half of the second round, because you're not taking a guy here in hopes that they're going to be a top 15, top 20 wide receiver, right? Like these are the kind of guys, maybe they'll pan out, maybe they won't. At the very least, you're hoping for like a bye week filler or a long-term taxi squad project, right? And that's exactly what Jalen Tolbert is. Tons of opportunity, decent amount of talent, and the football IQ is there, which is very important for getting opportunities as a young player.
Yeah, and I mean, I know he went to a small school at South Alabama, but he put up a really, really good year the last 2 years, both his junior and his senior year. Junior year, 64 catches for 1,085 and 8 touchdowns. Senior year, 82 catches for 1,474 and 8 touchdowns. So, I mean, like we were kind of talking about with Christian Watson, when these guys go to small schools, I mean, you kind of like to dominate at a small school is a necessity in order to be successful, or for us to project you to be successful at the next level. So I think Dallas did a good job scouting and getting this guy in what I think the 3rd round. He's kind of like an average sized receiver. So he's got the physical build at 6'3", 190. Not too big to knock your socks off, but definitely not like a short slot guy that's going to be quick and speedy on you. But yeah, I mean, here we are at the 19th pick. It's the crapshoot that we were talking about.
Yeah, at this point in the draft, it is what it is. And that's why I picked 20. I'm going to pick a guy that I don't even like. It's just the rest of the community does, and it's Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce is one of the lowest profile wide receivers on my predictive index in the last 4 years. Don't love that. Admittedly, didn't do a ton of film study on him, but I do know what he's about. I know he's a bigger receiver, 6'3", I think 210 or 215. So he is a big guy, and he is going to serve a purpose for the Indianapolis Colts, and that's why I'm taking him here. I don't love the talent, but I love the situation. I definitely, at least the short-term situation. I think Pierce is going to be the wide receiver 2 in that offense this year. Actually, I think Paris Campbell is going to be the wide receiver 2 in the offense this year, but Paris Campbell is made of paper and glass, so he'll be out of the picture by like week 3 at the latest. And that's why I'm taking Pierce here, because there's a realistic chance that he's only behind Michael Pittman on the pecking order. Matt Ryan is going to throw the ball for over 4,000 yards in Indianapolis, something that they have been missing for quite some time is consistent quarterback play, and that's what Matt Ryan's going to give them. I think it's going to be a nice spread offense with Michael Pittman leading the way, but Alec Pierce is going to eat. And I think, looking at the rookie receiver list, if he does either pass Paris Campbell on the depth chart or if Paris Campbell goes down like he always does, I could see Alec Pierce finishing ahead of Christian Watson. And that's me saying that knowing that Christian Watson is going to be potentially a top 2 target for Aaron Rodgers, because I just really like the situation in Indianapolis. There's really, it's Michael Pittman up here, and then Paris Campbell, Alec Pierce, and then a whole bunch of nothing, right? So, and they even don't really have a tremendous tight end room right now. It's just Mo Alley Cox, rookie tight end Jelani Woods, and Kylan Granson. And Jonathan Taylor doesn't go out and catch a lot. So, ton of volume opportunity for Alec Pierce. That's why I'm taking him here at 20.
Yeah, the Indianapolis offense, aside from the rushing game, left a lot to be desired last year with Carson Wentz. But my worry for Alec Pierce is that just his lack of domination at Cincinnati. You would hope to see when you're not at one of those Power 5. Well, I mean, I guess maybe Cincinnati was one of the top schools in the country these past 2 years. But yeah, he never really just dominated. I mean, 52 catches for 884. I mean, there's a lot of other guys on this team that you would have never heard of that were competing with him for the number 1 role. And it was really a very shared offense in Cincinnati. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they were so good. And maybe that will be one of the reasons why he is able to thrive in Indianapolis. But like you said, there's going to be virtually no target competition there. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people are so high on Michael Pittman. And one of the reasons why T.Y. Hilton was just such a gem for so long there, and I miss him dearly. But yeah, Alec Pierce is going to be, by the end of the season, he's going to be better than Paris Campbell and anything else that the Colts have to roll out at wide receiver 2 for the week. I worry that Matt Ryan might not be what he used to be. I think last year in Atlanta was a little bit telling that the cliff is kind of here for him. I think he could produce better than Phillip Rivers did 2 years ago in Indianapolis, but I don't know how much it's going to be by. I don't know how many receiving fantasy points are going to go around this offense when Jonathan Taylor is just going to eat up so much of the offense. But again, given the names on the rest of the board, there's no way to fault you for taking a guy who's going to be the number 2 receiver in his offense. I mean, there's really nobody else in here that you can say that about.
Yeah, it's if you're one of those guys that just has to have Christian Watson and you miss out on him, Alec Pierce is your guy. He's a guy that doesn't profile necessarily well, but he's a good athlete and finds himself in a good situation. So if you miss out on Watson, and they're both, I don't want to say Alec Pierce completely relies on the contested catch like Christian Watson does, but it is a very similar style of play between those two. So if you miss out on Watson, go for Pierce. But we got 4 picks left here. Tyler, who are you taking at number 21?
So here, there's going to be a lot of people who probably don't like this, but I'm going with Brian Robinson. I think he's going to be taking away a lot of that roles from Antonio Gibson. You might as well take the cheapest part of that Washington backfield because someone's going to emerge. And I mean, I would rather bank on Brian Robinson being there for a while and seeing what he can pan out on than just taking this, shot in the dark on J.D. McKissick this year when we know what J.D. McKissick is going to be. There's a lot of potential with Brian Robinson. Again, he was coached by a very good college football coach, so we like to see that. And I do think that Carson Wentz is an upgrade. We talked about it the other day. I think he's an upgrade from what Washington has had with Taylor Heineke and that whole mess that they've been seeing for the last however many years, million years, I guess, for Washington. I can't remember the last time they've had like a solid quarterback. But I do think that Carson Wentz actually can elevate that offense. To what extent, I don't know. But I think Brian Robinson could take some of the goal line work away from Antonio Gibson, and he could be a guy who just rushes for 30 yards and a touchdown every week, and you plug him in as a flex play when one of your guys are on a bye week, and you might be able to get a couple starts out of him throughout the year.
Yeah, I would compare Washington's backfield kind of to New England's backfield, right? Antonio Gibson I'm not comparing the style of play, but I am comparing the roles that these guys are going to have. Antonio Gibson can be viewed as the Damian Harris. Brian Robinson would be the Ramondre Stevenson, and JD McKissick is the James White. And I don't love having any part in a three down or a three back committee like that, three-headed monster as they would call it. And if I do, I prefer the PPR option, but obviously that's JD McKissick and he's 30 and this is a rookie draft, so he's obviously not here. I'll be honest, I don't love the pick, but again, it's pick 21. At this point, it's kind of just picking those guys that you believe in. I think you're right in the sense that Brian Robinson could see some goal line work. I think that out of all three backs, he'll have the least amount of PPR upside, mostly because he is the worst receiver out of all of them. He can catch the ball, but he's kind of like what I said about Kenny Walker. He can catch the ball, but it's not what makes him a good football player. It's big frame guy, 6'1", 228. Can't complain about that at all. You're kind of just getting a goal line back, and if something does happen to Antonio Gibson, or if JD McKissick does go down, and it's definitely very possible, you could see an influx in touches for him. So I don't love it, but I don't hate it. Like I'm not gonna get on anyone for taking Brian Robinson at 21. So
Yeah, I mean, we could look out, 2 years from now or so, and all of a sudden Brian Robinson is the lead back because maybe JD McKissick will probably definitely not be there. But maybe they have moved on from Antonio Gibson because it's going to get time for eventually Antonio Gibson's going to need a new contract. And if Brian Robinson is productive, Washington's not going to want to pay that to him. So, I mean, when we are at the 21st pick in a rookie draft, we do have to get creative in our thought processes and think down the line of, hey, there is a 15% chance that this could happen. And I could have just turned the 21st pick in the draft into a season of 15 points per game, out of this guy.
exactly. Well, and that's going to be my thought process with 22. I'm actually deviating from my list. You would think that I'm taking 20 or 21 or even 23 and 24, but I'm taking number 26, Malik Willis here on the list. And there's a really big thought process that I have behind this. One, he was my favorite quarterback pre-draft. He was a lot of people's favorite quarterback pre-draft, at least in the fantasy football community. I think anyone rooting for real life was a Kenny Pickett guy. Anyone rooting for fantasy was probably a Malik Willis guy because the rushing upside is that of, Jalen Hurts or Lamar. I don't want to call him Lamar Jackson, but those guys that can see 7, 8, even 900 plus rushing yards. Malik Willis is that guy. He's far from a polished passer. He's definitely a project piece at the quarterback position. I think he basically needs to redshirt as a rookie. I don't think he should see the field much, if at all, especially behind Ryan Tannehill. With that being said, it gives him a lot of time to develop. Tennessee has a lot of time to build around him. And this is a super flex league. So getting, my QB2 at 22, I'm going to be excited about. Not excited that he was a day 2 pick in the 3rd round. Not the best. But he does have the best situation by far, in my opinion, of all of those day 2, day 3 rookie quarterbacks. So, and I'm assuming you're probably not going to take a quarterback at 23.
No, you can exclude that from the possibilities.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to kind of talk my process through a little bit here. Malik Willis is playing for Tennessee. Tennessee is not going to be a bottom 5 team. Tennessee is not going to be a bottom 10 team unless Derrick Henry tears his ACL in like preseason or something like that. Like Derrick Henry and the rest of that team is good enough to keep Tennessee, and Ryan Tannehill, of course, they're good enough to keep Tennessee firmly in wild card contention in the AFC. They're not going to have a top draft pick next year. Desmond Ridder, who I like talent-wise, pretty similar to Malik Willis, but not as much upside. You would think that he's competing with Marcus Mariota. That is a legitimate quarterback competition. Why wouldn't I go with him? And the answer is because I think Atlanta could be in the running to have a top 5 draft pick next year. And I'm sorry, but if Young or CJ Stroud is on the board, Atlanta's not going to say, oh, we invested a 3rd-round pick in Desmond Ridder. Let's skip over him so that we can let Desmond Ridder go. Like, no, Ritter's going to get the axe if Atlanta has a top 5 pick next year. Same thing in Carolina. Carolina is either going to have a top 5 pick, or who knows, maybe Baker Mayfield pans out and they extend him. That's not good for Matt Corral. And then the last guy on the list, Sam Howell, he was a 5th-round pick. He's behind Carson Wentz, might even behind Taylor Heineke. It's a long shot for a 5th-round quarterback to sniff it, so I'm not really even considering here. But fact of the matter is, if something happens with Ryan Tannehill and Tennessee wants to move on from him, Malik Willis will quite literally be their only option unless they go out there and they spend big money in free agency. And they're already paying Ryan Tannehill a half decent amount of money considering what he is for the next couple of years. So Malik Willis is very much on the short list for Tennessee. And I just really like the situation. I love the fantasy upside with him.
Yeah, and I love the thought process that you had going through that, right? Because like you said, Tennessee's not going to be a team that's able to draft a quarterback high in the draft next year unless they trade up. And Atlanta is a team who can probably be a top 5 pick next year. They were top 8 this year, top 10 or something like that. I think it was the 8th pick. They got Drake London with the 8th pick, right? Yeah, so I mean, going from Matt Ryan to Marcus Mariota or Desmond Ridder, I mean, you would think that Atlanta team can't really be more productive this year. It seems like they're in a full-fledged rebuild, and they're actually kind of shooting to have a top 5 pick next year in the draft. And also, not to mention, there's a lot of people who thought Malik Willis was going to go in the top 10 of the draft to all those quarterback-needy teams, to Carolina. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to Carolina, to Pittsburgh was an option. Even everyone was, anybody who's quarterback needy was an option to take Malik Willis in the 1st round, and a lot of people passed on him. And that's also one of the reasons why I'm nervous about Kenny Pickett, is because so many teams did pass on him. So I think you're getting a similar, not really a similar investment, because Kenny Pickett was still a 1st-round pick, but what could be a similar situation in where you have an aging quarterback and you're not going to have a high draft pick, and this is what you're going to get. You're going to get a Malik Willis taste test before they decide to invest a top 10 pick, or before they decide to trade up and go get another quarterback.
Exactly. So there's a potentially really good opportunity there for him. And he could be used here and there as a rookie to show his spurts and kind of earn himself some playing time in the future. Like Ryan Tannehill he's getting older. I mean, he's good at the RPO, running the ball here and there. But Malik Willis is actually, he can excel in that. And he could be a guy that finds, small opportunities his rookie year, and hopefully he can build that into something to where he's legitimately contending for the starting job as soon as 2023. But that rushing upside is just fucking awesome. I mean, Jalen Hurts was not an amazing passer last year, and he finished as like a top 6 quarterback in fantasy because of those legs. That's what you'd be getting in Malik Willis. So for fantasy, it's tremendous opportunity at 22 overall. So we got 2 picks left here. Tyler, go ahead and take us away with your last one of the night.
All right, so my last one of the night, while I could have gone with Wan'Dale Robinson, I didn't like banking on both him and Daniel Jones to be good. I'm going to go with Daniel Pierce here. Not a high investment from Houston. Pierce? Yeah, what did I say?
Daniel, just making sure, because I think there is another Pierce somewhere in this draft.
Oh, no, yeah, I meant Dameon Pierce. But, yeah, I mean, I think kind of similar to why I like taking Marlon Mack in the 1,000th round of drafts is because there's just an easy path to a workload there. And especially for this young guy. I mean, Marlon Mack is getting old. Rex Burkhead, pretty much insignificant, if you ask me. I'd be really shocked if he's a major part of that backfield this year. But I think Dameon Pierce is going to be a guy who can make an immediate impact. And while he's not going to be a weekly starter for you, again, I think he could be a guy who who pops for 10 to 15 points once in a while his rookie year, and then could be left with a whole boatload of work and target share once those older running backs leave. And not saying that he's going to be only running back there and that Houston's not going to invest in the running back position, but yeah, I mean, I like his path to targets and his path to success more than almost anyone on this list. I think there's just less obstacles for him to go through than a lot of the other guys on the board. And also, I can pronounce his name as opposed to like half the guys that are left on the list.
Always helps when you can actually pick your player. No, I don't mind Pierce. Pierce is okay. He's not anything tremendous, not anything flashy, but this Houston backfield is wide open. And running backs, you don't need to profile as the greatest running back of all time to show that you mean something to an NFL team. And I think Dameon Pierce will have plenty of opportunities early on in his career to prove that he belongs in that backfield and that he could, at the very worst, be the RB2 in that committee. And I do get the sneaking suspicion that he'll beat out Marlon Mack. I can't promise you that Houston won't go out and draft an early running back next year, since they own a shit ton of draft picks going into next year's draft. But the immediate situation is there. And, we saw it with Elijah Mitchell last year. There are a lot of guys that, or even Ramondre Stevenson went later in drafts last year as well, if I remember correctly. But guys like that, there's a place for on the roster. And I'm not saying that Dameon Pierce could be like Elijah Mitchell. That's a long shot. That doesn't happen very often. But he will have the opportunity to show that he can be out there. And like I was saying earlier, when I was kind of evaluating Rachaad White, you want your running backs to get on the field as early as possible, because the older they are, the less appealing they are to NFL teams. And it's the less and less chance they're going to have to actually make meaningful touches out there. So, I mean, 23 overall for a running back that has a chance to start this year, fuck it, that's good.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that common NFL team building knowledge would say you don't invest in the running back position when you're in a rebuild, whether that's in Dynasty or in real life football. I mean, we've seen good running backs go to bad teams, and even though they end up producing in fantasy, their careers end up getting wasted. I think you know who I'm speaking about. There might be one or two running backs that you might like whose careers might have been wasted by bad teams. But now I'm getting off topic. Sorry.
You just like to make my blood boil, don't you? Well, if it makes you feel better, I agree. Don't like to admit it, but I agree. So I'll go ahead and I'll make the last pick of the draft here. And I'm going with the same thought process. I'm taking a running back that has a chance to start this year. I'm taking Tyler Algier, went to Atlanta Falcons in round 5. Funny enough, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 different ranks that running backs can get in my predictive model. There's generational, top 5, fantasy RB1, fantasy RB2, a bye week filler, and a bench piece. There are only 3 undrafted or 3 5th round or later running backs that have registered as anything more than just a quote unquote bench piece. And Tyler Algier is one of them. And he fits into good conversation with Elijah Mitchell and not so good conversation with Rodney Anderson. But if you're telling me at pick 24, I have a coin toss to get a guy that could be like Elijah Mitchell, fuck it, I'll do it. I think Elijah Mitchell is definitely more talented. Elijah Mitchell actually, as a 5th round or 6th round running back, and draft capital factors in big time to this predictive model. Elijah Mitchell was so good and so athletic out of college. He ranks number 23 out of 71 possible running backs since 2018, despite being a day 3 running back. So pretty damn good. I'm not comparing Tyler Algier to him, but there is definitely a big opportunity. The Falcons wide receiver 2 is Bryan Edwards. I think I mentioned this the other day in our mock draft video. There's a very half decent chance that Cordarrelle Patterson is less of a running back this year and is more of a true hybrid, right? Like, it's very much in the range of possibility for him to see less than 100 rushing attempts because he's being used more out wide. Well, that opens up the backfield completely, and the only 2 options left are Tyler Algier and Damian Williams. And Damian Williams is not a bad running back by any stretch of the imagination, but he's like 30 or 31. He's getting up there in age. He's not as explosive as he used to be. He had one, maybe two good seasons with Kansas City, and he hasn't done anything else in his career. So I don't think that he's magically going to revive in Atlanta, of all places. I think they're going to give Tyler Algier a lot of opportunities. I don't think he's going to be one of those guys that's going to go out there and score you a monumental amount of PPR points, but he could be a goal line back. Kind of a similar situation to what you think Brian Robinson is going to be in terms of, a short yardage kind of goal line back. The big difference between Algier and Robinson for me, though, is that I think Algier is going to actually see a fairly significant amount of touches as a rookie just because of how wide open this Atlanta backfield is. So Algier, I've taken him as early as like 205 or 206 in some of my drafts out there. So I'll take him at 212 all day, every day.
Yeah, like you said, a pretty easy path to targets there. The reason why I would go Allen or Brian Robinson over Tyler Algier is just because of the investment from the teams. Brian Robinson was drafted a lot higher. If their draft spots were swapped, I probably would have gone Tyler Algier there, no question. But I think Atlanta brought him in for a reason. Like you said, Cordell Patterson. He's not a career running back. He was kind of just a guy who played running back last year. It would make more sense for him to split out, or at least to some of the times to split back out and to put some more fresh legs back there. And I think, like I said, I don't think Atlanta's going to be in a lot of games this year. That's one thing that worries me. Not that I think Washington's going to be in a bunch of games this year, but I think Atlanta is going to have to be throwing the ball, playing from behind, like a lot. And that's something that we didn't really mention at all throughout this video with any of these guys. But it just kind of popped into my head, who's probably the second best running back on the field probably won't get too much production in on a team like that. But he's another one of those guys who in like next year, Atlanta doesn't really have any running backs on the roster, and it's just him. And if they do get a high caliber quarterback that's able to step in, and all of a sudden Drake London and Kyle Pitts are awakened, and that offense just wakes up, I mean, Atlanta has been a high powered offense for a long time. So if he ends up being the guy who gets to benefit from the goal line touches that are produced by Kyle Pitts and Drake London and one of the top quarterbacks from next year, then you just got yourself a really big steal at the 24th pick in this draft.
Yeah, at the very least, you're probably getting, a 1 to 2 year rental running back that if somebody goes down that offense should have plenty of upside. And who knows, he could go out there and prove to be, a 10 to 14 carry a game type of guy as soon as game one, because like we were saying, there's just not much going on in Atlanta. I wouldn't be surprised to see them invest early in running back next year. But I mean, Algier could have, he's not the receiver that James Robinson is, right? But the situation, he could have a very similar, I'm not going to call him a top 5 candidate like James Robinson was, but he could gain a lot of hype, just like James Robinson did right before his rookie season, just because of the amount of opportunities that he's going to see. So not saying Algier has even top 5 potential. I don't think that's true at all. But if you are looking for this year's James Robinson, if you're looking for this year's Elijah Mitchell, I think Algier is going to be about as close as you're going to come this late in the draft.
Yeah, he definitely has that opportunity. I'm not sure if he has that talent level, but I mean, that's yet to be seen. I mean, we can't tell you everything just by watching these guys highlight tapes, and as much as we would like to say that we can, it's very difficult to do so.
Exactly. So before we get going here, let's go ahead and just go in order reviewing what we did. So our first round, Breece Hall, Jameson Williams, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, and Chris Olave were those top 6 guys. Kenny Walker fell all the way to 107, which doesn't happen in many leagues, but it happens right here because we're sane people. Kenny Pickett, 108, Sky Moore, James Cook, Jahan Dotson, and then David Bell snuck into the first round for us. And then the next round, Christian Watson, Rachaad White, George Pickens, tight end extraordinaire, Trey McBride, Isaiah Spiller. And then, of course, we had John Mechie, Jalen Tolbert, Alec Pierce, Brian Robinson, potential breakout candidate, Malik Willis in the next couple of years, Dameon Pierce, and Tyler Algier. So no, that was a mouthful. Hopefully you were following along with me because you definitely zoned out as I read 24 names off paper. I apologize for that, but felt like I needed to. But before we wrap up here tonight, Tyler, you got any closing remarks?
Yeah, if you guys are still with us, thanks for watching. Go follow us on Twitter, join the Discord, like and subscribe. Big motivator for us. Thank you guys for watching, and can't wait to catch you guys next time.
Yeah, definitely having a ton of fun with these videos. Like Tyler said, like, subscribe, join Discord, all that fun stuff. Leave comments. We are still reviewing subscriber submitted rosters. So if you do have a Dynasty roster that you'd like us to take a look at, tell you what we think you could potentially do to even improve it. Or if you just want to hear, if you know you have a really good team and you just want to hear us drool over it, hey, that's cool too. Submit that in. But with that being said, for myself, for Tyler, and for that Dynasty show, we will see you next time.